Good evening, everyone, and welcome to St. Louis Parks Municipal Service Center. My name is Mark Hansen. I am the city's Public Works Superintendent, which, among many other hats and roles and responsibilities, puts me responsible for our Reilly Superfund site. So this evening is all about understanding our Reilly site, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there, both in terms of what's happening on the site itself, just the earth that's out there and the ball fields that are out there, and there's misconceptions potentially about the groundwater, both from a drinking water quality perspective and from just a general contamination perspective. For instance, out of curiosity, do we, show of hands, if I was to tell you which is directly related to the Reilly site, PAHs or VOCs, how many people think the PAHs are related to our Reilly site? So a small handful. How many people think the VOCs are related to our Reilly site? So the answer is the PAHs. The VOCs are actually from a separate potential contaminant source, not related to the Reilly site. So that's just an example of one of the many things that I'm hopeful that you'll be able to learn this evening regarding our Reilly site. Because, for example, that PAH-VOC issue is one of the many misconceptions that are out there. Unfortunately, we have many folks from external agencies that are here to provide presentations and are available from an open house perspective for you to either ask questions, large group, if you think the question pertains to those around you as well, or small group if either A, you're not comfortable asking a question in a large group, or if you just think, hey, I have a question specific to me or my property, you can seek out any one of the stations and ask those questions in a more personal setting. But before I go too far, there's several folks in the room that I would like to acknowledge. First and foremost, our mayor, Mayor Dick Spano, is here this evening as well. Our Ward 3 council member, Mr. Greg Lindbergh is here, as is one of our at-large members, Mr. Tom Miller is here. It didn't happen magically to go from a heavily used industrial site for 55 years to the beautiful park that you see today. It took a lot of effort from all the agencies and the people in this room, as well as their predecessors, to make that conversion happen. So it's important to both acknowledge them and thank them for coming. So, this is our Reilly site in 1920s. Reilly operated from 1917 to 1972, so over the course of 55 years. Now, one of the misconceptions, again, is that Reilly intentionally contaminated the earth and the groundwater. That is not true. That is one of the result of the contamination, the cause of the contamination, is just one of those things, that's how business was done. Nobody knew any better, that's how business was done. So if you look at the quality of the construction, you just know there's going to be leaks in the pipes. You know there's going to be spills during transportation. This here was where the preservative function took place, where the timber was put into the pressure area and the preservatives were driven into the lumber, right? Well, then that lumber was taken out and it was stored open air. Well, as precipitation occurs, that's some of what's on the surface is going to wash off and get on the ground. So no, I would never imagine it was intentional contamination, but nevertheless, the product of their very function, both from generation of the creosote and the preservation process, did contaminate the site over the course of those 55 years. Yeah.
I served on the Environmental Improvement Commission in St. Louis Park from approximately 1974 to 1976 as a student representative. And at the time, it was known to the city that Reilly Tar was dumping waste contaminants down wells. It wasn't just open air spillage. It was not contained very well. But I was there when this stuff was going on, when they were trying to reclaim the land. And so to say that they didn't intend, maybe they didn't intend, but they also were not careful. It wasn't just open air, non-point runoff from stuff. They were putting stuff down wells.
See, that's the first time I've heard of that. I've heard of it as an accusation, but in no official reports have I seen that.
The
that's
city
occurred.
manager edited our minutes
So,
of our meetings.
and obviously I can't speak to that in my
I
present
can't, I
role.
was there.
So, that, I can say thank you for that input, but for purposes of tonight's presentation, I'm not going to further an accusation. I'm going to go off what I know from the research I've done, and we're going to say that it was primarily non-point, and from the causes described, and then we're going to tell that regardless of how it got there, how we're dealing with it. Is that fair?
Well, it was collusion with the city.
So, and again, tonight is not about
Okay.
throwing blame. Tonight is about how do
You're
we.
saying that they didn't intentionally do it, that this happened, they prohibited the release of research that had been done. But I heard it.
And we can take that as another data point. So, but again, tonight is about how the city and our counterparts have worked to redevelop that park, or that site into the park that it is today. So again, what's the problem? The problem is you have that non-point spillage and other contamination sources that occurred on the surface. And then through the next two bullets, you see the various ways that that got into the groundwater. Whether A, it worked its way to an old abandoned well that might have just leaked right down to the groundwater because the well was still open at the time and went right down into the groundwater. Or it's possible that as it sat on the surface and rain fell, rain percolated into the ground and brought those contaminants with it. Or it's possible that, although for a large part several of the aquifers have what's called confining layers, that still over the course of time, when you're talking 55 to 80 years, since 1917, that's almost 100 years, the contaminants may have migrated aquifer to aquifer as they work their way down. What we do know, it is a proven fact, that the contaminants reached several aquifers. So, the point I want to make here is in that prior picture, this kind of a close-up, this is a macro of the site. So you can see just how large the Reilly operation was. And that accounts for a lot of non-point spillage and runoff and leakage that could occur that contributed to the problem.
Those were railroad ties?
Yeah.
Primarily railroad ties. In the heart of the site is where the distilling operation occurred, whether you think Reilly or so, but out around the perimeter you can actually see the south side of the road. So this is just a quick graph that shows how multi-aquifer contamination can occur, that whether it worked its way to the well from runoff or potentially was dumped directly into the well. However it got there, it goes into one well. If a well is screened or open across multiple aquifers, it can spread out in both aquifers. Does that make sense? Head nods? Okay. So, in 1972, the city bought the site. You'll see another chart shortly that lays it out in bullet point format. But for purposes of this slide, in 1972, the city bought the site. Over the course of the next 10 years to about 84, the city worked towards identifying what made sense to put on the site. And at the time, large-scale residential development on the north end was what was needed in the city. So that's what went in the early 80s. And then over that course of the time, in the late 70s, we realized that there's the smell in the water and suspected contamination of the well water. So there was a ton of both soil and groundwater studies that were done through the 70s and 80s, and further redevelopment was stopped while we tried to learn and understand the site. 1986 came along, was the consent decree. That was the binding document that focused on the cleanup and the maintenance of the site. That document still exists today, 30 years later. It has gone through 6 heavily scrutinized 5-year reviews. That's part of what the agencies here will talk about, and part of their responsibilities is to conduct these reviews, the multi-year reviews, as well as annual sampling. You'll hear more from them in terms of just monitoring the site. But in short, the capital costs or the construction costs associated with our large treatment plants was the responsibility of Reilly. And then the long-term maintenance and operation of those plants became the responsibility of the city. Yes, ma'am.
What is GAC and GTF?
GAC is granular activated carbon. That is the specific water treatment method for treating or removing PAHs, which is the contaminant associated with the dioxide.
And what's
The
GTF?
GTF, we have 2 water treatment plants that use granular activated carbon. We have a third treatment plant that also uses granular activated carbon, but we call it a different name because it doesn't feed into our drinking water system. It cleans up smaller wells and then allows us to put it into the storm sewer. So we call it the GTF so we don't confuse it with our water treatment plants. So it's kind of an in-house name, but it's a great question. It's groundwater treatment facility. Our costs are about $600,000 per year, and you see the breakdown, how it kind of adds up to that. You'll see in subsequent slides the number of wells that we monitor, take samples of, and look for water quality results. The operation of those 2 water treatment plants and the third groundwater treatment facility, just the O&M of 3 other drinking water wells, and then well 23 was the original Reilly well. So that one is still pumped today and fed. It's one of the 3 wells pumped today that are fed to that groundwater treatment facility. And that's called source control, where we're pumping that specific well to try and keep the contaminants from spreading further. They're kind of the source, the heart of the contaminants from spreading further. All the other wells are doing that same thing from a gradient control perspective, where subsurface in the groundwater table, we're pulling water out of the ground in the attempt to keep it from spreading outside the city boundaries. Yes?
So when the city took it over in 1972, had Reilly ceased operations there?
Yeah.
Okay, so then what steps, how much dirt was actually removed from that piece of property? What were the big things that had to be done?
I can't tell you how much of the soil was removed. I don't have that number off the top of my head. I know there was an enormous amount of soil relocated for purposes of building the northern sites, the 2 residential complexes on the northern site. And then an enormous amount of soil was brought in as well to cover what was left behind us.
So this went from Walker Street, and then how close to Minnetonka did it go?
When it, went from Walker to 32nd. Walker to 32nd. Louisiana's kind of the primary boundary, but you did have Apple Valley Ready Mix, Park Tavern, site down here. So it's approximately 8 acres size-wise. So this map is meant to show you.
Mark, there was somebody in the second row there, got a question.
Oh, that's right. Last summer, when they were doing a lot of the road work, they found a pipe with a lot of gooey, they said, they thought it was creosote in it. Do you know, was that an isolated just pipe that was left in the ground, or was it from a larger source?
So you want to speak to that? You know what she's referring to?
So I'm not I was the project manager for that project. I'm not sure what pipe you're referring to.
It was right along Walker Street by the round apartment complex area there on the bottom of the thing. I believe it was on Walker Street across from the park area, and when they were digging.
I thought it was by the hydrant.
Yeah.
I think it was the hydrant down there.
Right, so they did replace the hydrant. There was a higher amount of creosote in that area.
Okay.
But
It was
there was
just
nothing
an
with-
isolated thing then?
Right, there was
Okay.
nothing within the pipe, it was on the outside of the pipe.
Thank you.
Yep.
Speaking of that same area, there was Bell Pole, that had creosote, they dipped the telephone poles. And that soil was contaminated, really, it was very smelly, you could smell it from Highway 100. And that soil was taken and dumped out in Lakeville. And they put a fence around it, called like a government secured area, neighbors are complaining about the smell. It leached into the farm of Eleanor Mondale. She had a quick form cancer that died from.
The soil as they were treating it, because I was on the committee, 74, 75 through 76. The city bought excess seed of like corn and wheat and different things because the soil was so contaminated they couldn't even grow grass on it. There were even discussions in our committee that if the landscaping included a pond, we were afraid a dog would come up and drink the water and die. So they lined the pond originally with some kind of plastic material to try to prevent the leaching. And they planted many crops on there to get enough organic material to support something. So they would just grow the crops and then plow it under and then put another thing in. They kept doing that until it could sustain grass. But there was discussion with the city that the first development was to be low-income housing. There was actually conscious discussion that they didn't want it open to families, but they wanted that whatever the first development that they put in there, that they wanted it to be for disabled people and elderly, because they felt the liability would be more limited, that they would be exposing the building as a whole.
So I will tell you this, a lot of this information I'm hearing is new to me, and would be very happy to discuss offline, because we are interested in learning as much as we can about the Reilly site. So I'd like to get your contact information, so we can follow up and get these additional, like I said earlier, data points of information. So if you wouldn't mind afterwards, I'll be at the table over to my left, if you wouldn't mind. doing that.
I worked at Methodist Hospital in 1960. I worked with a pathologist because I was in pre-med. But anyway, he said, you can no longer run it into the creek. Everything on those autopsy tables was not from natural causes. And that this stayed in the creek, and then the creosote sealed those organisms. And then they kept that going downstream, and we diagnosed there was a high incidence of neurological or cancer clusters.
And the concept of a cancer cluster is one of the things that the Department of Health will speak to when you're available to respond to questions.
I discussed it, but this
So-
will show me where it isn't. I can show it where it is. Because I had microbiology. and
So then I would encourage you to talk to our Department of Health reps after this. Yep. So again, this map, the drift, flat hill, St. Peter aquifers are what we call the upper aquifers. We do not pull drinking water from these upper aquifers. It doesn't make efficient sense. We can't pull enough water from them to feed a municipal sized well. And B, I guess really there isn't a B. For financial reasons, we don't do it because you can't run a municipal well. The flow of water on that groundwater table can't sustain the municipal well. But because it's the upper aquifer, we are very concerned with understanding where the contaminants are and the level of degree of contamination. So that's why we have so many monitoring plans. The Prairie San Jordan aquifer is kind of a lower aquifer. This is where we do have our municipal wells. So again, you see different sites where we're both monitoring as well as pumping. A quick reference point, and if you're interested and cannot read this little key down here, I have copies of this map available at my table that you are welcome to take with you if you want to be able to see it better. Purposes of the large screen, I will tell you the yellow are the wells that we monitor, the red are the wells that we pump and have that granular activated carbon treatment for PAH removal on it. The blue are the wells that we pump that do not require granular activated carbon because we don't find PAHs in those wells. So that just gives you an idea. Orange wells are ones that are sealed. So they're filled with concrete. They were active wells at one time, now they're sealed. But really, for purposes of water production, the blue and the red are the ones that feed into our water distribution system. So, this is kind of a summary slide of everything we talked about, from the fact that the city bought the site in '72. We put those residential units on the north end in the early '80s. At the same time, we were doing a ton of studies to understand both the groundwater and the site itself. 86 was that binding, if you will, consent decree that still exists today. In 1991 is when we completed our present water treatment system. So another one of the misconceptions that may be out there is that we have bad water in St. Louis Park. Now, is the groundwater contaminated? The groundwater contaminated in St. Louis Park in the area of those red wells? Yes, the groundwater is contaminated. But when we pull it out of the ground and run it through our treatment systems, it is very much safe to drink. That is one of the things you will hear in the Department of Health. That as a third-party entity, if you will, not associated with the city, their responsibility is to monitor the quality of our water. And they do ensure that it is safe to drink. So I will foot stomp that our water is very much safe to drink. I happily drink it every day when I come to work. And to be quite honest, the city of Plymouth is not here. I prefer it to the city of Plymouth water where I live. So I think it tastes a whole lot better. And then in 2002 is when we had the construction project that built the present day park. I love that park. 2 of my kids have used that park for soccer tournaments. It is a great park if you have soccer players and you always have to get there 45 minutes to an hour before the game. It's a great park to use that trail system and just walk around and enjoy the fresh air and the scenery while you're waiting for your game to be played. So I love it when I see on the schedule that my kids are playing at Louisiana Oaks. I think it's a tremendous asset to the city. So, again, I want to foot stomp that site, although I have responsibility as the city rep, by no means do we work and monitor that site single-handedly. It is very much a team effort in monitoring that site with regard to both the city's role from engineering projects to different parks-related projects, to the work that the EPA does as the overall site manager, responsible party at the environmental agency, to the work that the MPCA does and the Department of Health. You will hear shortly now from each of those agencies, from their respective reps, and we'll get into roles and responsibilities so that if you have questions, you know who to be sure and see. And I'll also point out that our St. Louis Park Historical Society is also represented here. If you just had general G-Wiz questions and want to see pictures potentially of the site, ask you.
I wanted to say that I have gone through week by week through the newspaper through the 70s and all of the things that were happening as they were happening. So I have a very, very long page on the creosote plant history, but also all the things that happened after it was purchased by the city and all of the steps. Not of the science. I don't go into the science, but you know, it's all of the things that were happening at that time. So, and I also have links to all the health studies too. So.
There you go. Sounds good. So Again, a reminder that in this, well, that comes later, I guess, the reminder about the larger questions. First, we got to get through our presentations from the individual agencies, and first up, we have the EPA.
Mark,
You are welcome.
which you had told me about the Finland water. That's where I'm staying, so I'll make sure to get some water with me tonight from St. Louis Park. My name is Edgardo Leon, and I am the Community Involvement Coordinator with EPA, and with me is Nabil Fayumi, who's Remedial Project Manager with EPA. We are both in the Superfund program. We work out of the Region 5 office in Chicago, so thank you to the city for hosting us and for having us here. It's always a great pleasure to come out to beautiful St. Louis Park and spend some time. We're here to share with you information that we have. We've just recently completed, first of all, the community involvement plan. Community involvement plan is required by the Superfund law. It's basically a document. It's always a work in progress because it's never a final document, but it's a blueprint, if you will, of the best way for the EPA to maintain open dialogue with people in the community that live near a Superfund site. So we recently completed this community plan. We're out here in February. We interviewed over 30 people, current as well as former residents of St. Louis Park, officials of the city, and asked them, what's the best way for the EPA to engage you, to keep information flowing back and forth between ourselves and you as a community? What are the questions that you have? What are the concerns that you have? So that's essentially what's summarized in the community involvement plan. This is up on the website. In addition, we brought extra copies of last November's fact sheet when we were out here for an open house that we hosted. To again just share information and just give an update as to what's going on with the Superfund program. The posters that we have in the back show a timeline of milestones in the cleanup efforts at the site. It also has a list of the major decision points that were made to address groundwater and drinking water contamination at the site. And if you have any questions about the Superfund law, I'm not a lawyer, but I know enough to be dangerous about how the Superfund process works. And we have poster information about that. So I'm more than willing to meet with you one-on-one. So I'll turn it over to Cliff. Actually, you can go to the next one, and Nabil will talk briefly about the 5-year.
Yes, again, my name is Nabil Fayumi, and I'm with US EPA. I'm the project manager for the Reilly Water site. As you heard today, we have been doing work at the site since 1986. US EPA selected a remedy for the site, and our main focus was to make sure that the drinking water that people are drinking is safe to drink, but also to make sure that the contamination that's present is not spreading. It's staying where it is. It's being captured. So we've been working with that, with the state, and the city is the implementer of the remedy. So while it's an EPA remedy, we provide the overall site, the city implements it, and we make sure that you do their work according to approved work plan. We coordinate with the EPA, we coordinate with the state. So this is really our roles and our responsibilities. Recently, we did a 5-year review. Superfund law requires us to do an extensive review for these big sites once every 5 years. The review itself is to make sure that the remedy that we selected is still protective, is still operating as intended, and find ways to improve it and to make it better. And then also, just kind of give a closer look at the site overall. And we are required by the law to do that. With that said, though, we don't just ignore the site for 5 years and don't do anything on it. There's monthly sampling that takes place. There is quarterly sampling that takes place. There's an annual reporting that takes place that the city gives us to review. So we look at the site, throughout this 5-year period, but once every 5 years, we take a closer look at the site and see how the remedy is performing. And as you notice, the site has been around long enough This is the 5th review that we did for the site. And the overall finding that the remedy is protective, that the drinking water is safe to drink, and that the contamination in the groundwater is being contained, it's not spreading. We identified a few issues that we need to improve on, and those issues, relates, for example, to some properties. If there is, we need to make sure there's no material that's buried. Again, when people go and do some repair work to sidewalks, replace a fire hydrant, there have been instances where material was encountered, and those are a concern for us. So one of the action items for us, for example, we need to go ahead and locate these properties and make sure that we have a mechanism in place, for that not to happen. If the city needs to go out and put in a sidewalk, they need to submit a work plan to the EPA and the state and make sure that the work plan is approved and make sure that's what we are doing is protective to the community. The report itself is available online, and I'll be happy to provide hard copies for anybody who wants one. If you have any specific questions you would like to ask us about the report, please stop by. We'll be happy to answer those as well.
I hear you saying about groundwater, drinking water. What about wastewater? What does that contain filtered? Is that monitored or tested?
From the site.
Well, just overall, just in storm sewers and runoffs and parking lots and all that type of stuff.
I will refer this to the city. I mean, wastewater will be regulated according to the surface water discharge.
Yeah, we have some of the stormwater tested, it's by our, that's part of the MS4.
It is a requirement.
And anytime we do any work with any of the storm ponds, correct, we have to do soil samples, water samples.
So if I can, let's let all the agencies roll through with their presentations, because right after that occurs, we'll open the floor, and then you'll know who best to, throw your question out, and we can turn it over, and you'll know who's speaking at that point, because they will introduce themselves. So next up, thank you very much, folks. Next up, we have the Department of Health.
Hi, everybody. How are you tonight? Good. I'm David Jones. I'm with the Minnesota Department of Health. And thank you for having us out here. I'm going to describe a little bit about what we have and who came along, and I'm also just going to explain one thing that's really important. With respect to the questions about cancer studies, et cetera, we are more than happy to put together a very complete discussion about that. It's a really complicated topic, and it merits being better prepared than we are, bringing in some people who work with that kind of question on a daily basis. And I'd like to know, and one thing we'd like to find out tonight is if there is a large interest in that, we'd be more than happy to have another event or create some kind of opportunity to bring a good presentation, a thorough discussion of it, and also field questions of that. So I'm just saying that right now so that you're not disappointed if you come back and expect me to have all the answers. That's not my immediate area of expertise, and those people did not come along tonight. And like I said, if you have one question, we can refer you to those people. We can give you their phone numbers, tell you how to contact them. But really, if there is a substantial, significant interest for a lot of people, we'd be more than happy to arrange another event like that. So I'll just start out with our mission. And our mission at the Department of Health is protecting, maintaining, and improving the health of all Minnesotans. You might wonder why the Department of Health is involved in a site like this. Don't we just give shots and stuff like that? We have a whole environmental health division, in fact. And we have people that work with questions of cancer, and those obviously overlap with the environment in some cases. And some people here that represent a very large program in the Department of Health, that's our drinking water protection program, and that's a group that regulates public water supplies and does a lot of assurance and technical assistance to make sure that public water supplies and other water supplies in the state of Minnesota are safe for people to consume and protect people's health. So a couple of things I'll mention besides what I just said. We also have a group that keeps up to date and studies the toxicology of various chemicals that are in the environment, particularly those that are most common, and we set health-based values or guidelines. Those can be for air, they could be for what's in water, etc. So that may be something that comes up. I just want to mention that those folks work with the Department of Health, and it's actually a large group, and they work very diligently on keeping up to date with the latest science on what chemicals can do to humans if they get into the body. Let's see, who else? I did mention our drinking water protection folks, and we also have a group that's sort of well management. They work on a lot of things related to wells, drilling of wells, making sure they're up to code so that a poorly constructed well doesn't result in contamination we don't want in the groundwater. They oversee other things related to protecting zones where water is perhaps vulnerable to making its way down into drinking water supplies, a surface water protection kind of program. So we have a lot of different activities, and myself and Julie, who's in the back, we represent a group that does health assessments on a variety of sites, including this one we've worked off and on over the years, and a lot of our work is in partnership with PCA, sometimes Department of Ag when they're working on investigating and cleaning up sites. And a big thing we do is interact with the community, find out what the community wants to know, and sometimes we're able to assist with sort of talking about the health side of what people want to know. And I think we're pretty good at translating very technical things into kind of very understandable health language too. So I think that's another role that we play well, and that's kind of why we're here tonight. We've been involved because of the 5-year review, and then when some of the questions have come up at public meetings, we've gotten interested again in what can we do to help this community understand what's going on. Because one of the things we really don't want to have happen is for people to stress about things that don't matter. We'd rather have people focus on the things that really are important to their health and not lose a lot of sleep or get their own stress hormone levels up real high about things that there is an answer. Maybe you don't have it, and we'd like to help you see what you do have control of in your health, in your life, and not worry about the things that really maybe don't matter. So if we can help clarify that, we like to play that role as well. And sometimes that's just listening and answering questions to the best of our ability. So maybe we can move on. So some of our activities related to the Reilly chemical site specifically, we are, as Mark mentioned, we have this consent decree. The Department of Health is one of the parties to that decree. That happened, we were signatory to that and involved long before I was involved with the site, or probably even working at the health department. Actually, it was before I was working at the health department. But we have had involvement at various stages with the consent decree and Reilly TAR along the way through different programs. And then Julie and I, in fact, worked a lot with Heriberto in the interviews that we did in January. And I don't know, we interviewed like 35 people to try and listen to what our concerns people have, what our questions people have, try and find out what kinds of things can we collectively provide answers to. And I think if you want to read more about the questions people brought up, stuff that document's available on the website now, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So
That's the website where these are posted. What website?
this would be the EPA's website. I'm sorry, that's a great point. And I think we've heard that over and over again. Who are all you people and what are your roles? And forgive me for not saying that clearly. That's an EPA document that is on the EPA website.
Yeah, we have the URL, the address.
So next slide. Some of the things that we've been working on related to the site, either really related or sort of tangentially, recently are here. Drinking water protection, and Ike Bradley, who's in the back, is the district engineer that works very closely with Mark and Jay. We, as I said, are the regulator for public water supplies and do oversight as well as a lot of technical assistance. And Ike would be able to talk to any anybody got questions about the system and our involvement with that. We do have a program called Minnesota Cancer Surveillance Program, and we have a very robust system that studies cancer in the state, collects cancer data on all diagnosed cases in the state. And because there were some questions that arose last fall that we became aware of, we asked them to update previous work they've done on the question of are the cancer rates in St. Louis Park something that's out of the ordinary or greater than what you see elsewhere in a comparable population. And they looked at this again, and I think it's the third time they've looked at this question. They used more recent data because previously they did it with what they had, and now they've updated it. And that information is available. We do have a sheet in the back that will provide where you can get all the stuff that's on the Department of Health
You don't,
website.
sorry, you don't know that off the top of your head,
What the URL is?
what the report was, what the findings of the report.
Oh,
St. Louis Park.
I do know, well, I can summarize it. I was just gonna say, one point before I tell you what they said. I think it's really important that you read the report because there's a lot in there. And I could summarize what the basic finding is, but you're missing a lot if you just go with that. It's really important to understand what the study's limitations are, what it can and can't do. There's certain things it doesn't prove, and it's important to appreciate that when you read what it says. What they did find is that looking at the cancer rates, overall cancer rates, and then divided or then split out by gender, controlled for by age, looking at 20 different specific types of cancer, they really did not see anything different from the metro area as the comparison group. What that tells us is that there's not some big thing out there that would show up in a system like this. The system is not going to detect everything, and it's certainly not, that result is not saying that some individuals' cancers are not caused by a certain thing, maybe Reilly or something like that. But it's really important that you appreciate what the system, the tool, the report, the way they analyze it can and can't do before you maybe make a judgment about what they did find.
And was it retrospective or was it looking at cancer rates starting from a certain year?
It was looking at the past 20 years, I believe. This is a program that I do not work with on a daily basis, so I also don't want to say things wrong or misrepresent. But again, I would really encourage people who are interested to read the report. It's a public document. It's created for this community to read. And again, as I said before, the individuals who prepared it would be happy to talk to people. If there's just one person who has a question, I can tell you how to contact them, and they would be happy to explain what they found and walk you through it. If there's a large number of people that want to hear about that, they would be more than willing to do that. Come here on some evening or Saturday afternoon or something, and we could do a presentation on it. That's something they've offered. They just weren't able to come tonight.
I'm just curious, that cancer surveillance system, I just want to ask, I'll ask this quickly. Okay, you can control the rest of it. I just want to ask, the last big public meeting we had,
The one in
a few
November.
months ago, this winter, whenever it was, there was a cancer map that was up there that there were reports of, okay, these people had cancer and there were, the dots on the map showing where they were. Is that coordinated with this at all? No. So
that
you
was-
guys have
that
not
was-
taken any
That
information
was
from?
private individuals who, I think mostly by word of mouth and using social media, collected, I would call it anecdotal data. People just said that I know of
correct,
somebody, or
anecdotal.
it happened to me, or it happened to someone in my family.
But I think
Our
what I was
system-
hearing a lot of was,
Yeah.
oh, these people used to live in the community, well, we can't find them, they've all moved away, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know if there was ever a concerted effort to talk to people who were living here during the height of all the pollution. I mean, obviously, some of them are dead now, but, I know people who are living in the neighborhoods, I wasn't, I was living in Minneapolis, but I knew about the site. And I knew people who were actually living in the neighborhoods who smelled Reilly tar on a regular basis. So I mean, to discount those anecdotal reports, I think is kind of short-sighting them. I mean, because you should pay attention to them, you have to verify them. But if you ignore them, of course, maybe it's gonna look like the rest of the city if you don't pay any attention.
Yeah, you bring up good points, and I do not mean to minimize the impact of cancer on anybody's life or any person's individual case. That's a personal tragedy. It's a tragedy for the family. We all know that, and it would be for any of us, myself included. If somebody in my family had cancer, that would be the same thing. I would be upset about it. And that's the normal response. What I am saying is we have a system that's built to do a certain thing. It's created for a particular purpose. It is collecting a certain type of data for a certain kind of use. It is not everything else. And if we wanted to do a different kind of study than what this system allows for, and this is kind of the gold standard in the scientific community. Now, there are other ways to do studies that we have not done because this is a surveillance system and we're using the surveillance data to look as best we can. We are doing ongoing surveillance. If we wanted to do a different kind of study, that would be a special effort.
So where is the study
At this point,
available?
ma'am,
Can I click on the study? Can I find the study? Just let me ask that and I'll
So,
show you one.
is it the surveillance system or
Yeah.
the report?
The report.
You can find the report, and we have a sheet back there that has references, and it is on there with a short description and the URL to get it on the internet.
It's
You
in here,
can,
in this report.
no.
Well, you can give me the reference after.
Just go back to our
You can
table.
really
Just
ask
go
him,
back
I'll
to
let
our table.
him, I'll break my stroke.
Let me also say that there's a lot of information about our cancer surveillance system in
Oh, that's
the
the
reports,
other.
and you can read about
Thank
that
you.
as well.
Thank you very much.
So one last thing, we do have a person that is working right now because we heard that there are a lot of questions about drinking water safety, historically, currently, et cetera. So a staff person that I work with is putting together a summary document to try and address some of the questions. We're hoping that we can get that out by this fall and maybe clarify some of the confusion and help people understand what the data actually shows, et cetera. And rather than having to have another meeting, although we could do that, we're going to put it in a report first, and that'll be a public document that anybody can read about. And again, if somebody wants to know more, we are happy to talk to you
Will
about it.
that be online or will it be sent to us in the mail, the report?
I don't think we've gotten to deciding how we'll distribute it, and we'll look at making it available. I mean, one thing we might do is work with the city to promote it and tell people how to get it. There's a lot of ways to skin that cat. Our goal will be to make it readily available.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your patience. And Dave, thank you for describing the Department Health's role. At this point, let's move to the NPCA. Talk about your role and responsibility.
Sure.
Good evening. Thanks to everybody for coming out. I'm Craig Bigelow. I'm supervisor of one of the remediation units at the Pollution Control Agency. And in that unit, we handle Superfund sites, oversee Superfund sites in the state, including site assessment, Superfund, and record cleanup sites. I'd like to introduce Dave Shearer. In back, Dave is the senior hydrogeologist for the MPCA working on the Reilly site. And then also Jen Jevnasek, who is project manager. And both Jen and Dave work on the VOC plume as well, which we'll talk a little bit about. So as Nabila and Berto mentioned, EPA is the lead for the Reilly car site, which is good for us because the EPA brings both resources and staff and Department of Justice, which helps us on some of these sites where we don't have to put as much resources to it. But our role is to provide technical assistance to the EPA. We work together with them in the city of St. Louis Park. Part of what we do is evaluate soil and groundwater data that comes in reports annually. We do a fairly complete review of that, make determinations of protectiveness. Are treat systems working properly? Are they capturing what they're supposed to be capturing? We provide technical input into sampling plans on an annual basis after we review all the data that comes in that year, make recommendations for changes in the sampling plan or the sampling report. Nabil talked a little bit about the 5-year review and how every 5 years there's this large document put together, a fairly comprehensive review of the remedy that's in place. We also do that somewhat on an annual basis as we review those monitoring reports and the data that comes in, and making those determinations. Is capture of contaminated groundwater both shallow and deep? Is that complete? Is it containing contamination? We also assist EPA in regulatory oversight. You mentioned the consent decree that's out there, and working with the different partners to make sure that everybody is managing their end of it and that we're in compliance with that agreement. We also assist with redevelopment, or mostly these days improvements, where there's improvements, walkways put in place, and Neil mentioned that just a little bit. Walkways, road construction where they run into contaminated soil. Plans are put together, how they're going to manage the contaminated soil, how they're going to test it, where they're going to dispose of it, and how. So we're involved in reviewing those plans as well as we also help assist with these outreach. So we've had a public meeting last November, one in January. We had a discussion at the library in April with a group of concerned citizens. And then as long as you're on it, you ain't even hardly see it. So one thing we, at the beginning, Mark talked a little bit about PAHs and VOCs. Now, up here is the definition of the Reilly site that we've been talking about. Coal tar and wood treatment, creosote, and from that we get polyaromatic or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and the source of that is the Reilly tar site. Then, in addition to that, there's a state Superfund site that we call the St. Louis Park solvent book, and that's made up of industrial solvents that may have been used either in dry cleaning or degreasers. It's chlorinated solvent. PCE was a common solvent, so was TCE, and they tend to break down into other components of DCE and vinyl chloride. So what we wanted just to make sure is that everybody's aware that basically these are two sites. There's two different groundwater zones. I'm going to have Dave, our hydrogeologist, come up and just briefly talk about some of the different components. And once he gets through that, then there's specific questions about that. We can address those next conversations.
Thanks, Greg. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the city's opportunity, or city inviting us to come out here and talk with you about the site. Real briefly, I want to talk about the St. Louis Park solvent flow site. And this all started out in 2004 when the city of Edina had their municipal well 7, which is located down in this end of big, you can't see that very well probably from where you're at, but there's this big loop here. Edina Well 7 had a chemical called vinyl chloride showing up in their drinking water supply. Okay. That well, contaminant concentrations got up to a point where that well was shut down. They discontinued using it, and they called the MPCA and basically said, we need some assistance with this issue here. Okay? So when we get involved with a site, our standard operating procedure is to address human health risk, characterize the site, and then develop a plan to clean it up. And that's what the process is here. Now, when we started here, this is an aquifer that's 285 to almost 500 feet down below the ground surface. Trying to figure out where it's coming from is an arduous task, but that comes later. What we end up doing with the city of St. Louis, with the city of Edina, is that well was shut down. There were some other vinyl chloride concentrations showing up in Edina Well 2 and Edina Well 15. So first order of business, address risk. Okay, so we worked with the city of Edina developing a water treatment plant. And what we ended up coming up with is a central water treatment plant located right in this area here, where all the water is piped into one central location. It's stripped off with air stripping technology to remove the volatile organic compounds, and then it goes into it meets drinking water standards, so then it goes into the municipal system. So that's operational. It's working very effectively. Next step was to move on and try and characterize the site. Okay? But the goal is we want to clean this thing up. So throughout the whole process, we collected a lot of data. We collected water samples from every well that we could find in this deep aquifer here. And the data tended to show that the contaminant concentrations get higher, well, they get higher concentrated as you go north, and we're seeing more of the parent compound. And when we take time to go around the different stations here, we have a slide that basically shows vinyl chloride comes from a breakdown process of other industrial solvents. So as they break down, then they form vinyl chloride. So our work is basically identified, okay, so this big ring is where our contaminant plume is in the deep aquifer. And as our investigation continued, we got up into here to St. Louis Park. Okay? And then we started sampling the shallow groundwater table. And this red loop here identifies the extent of groundwater contamination in the what's called the glacial drift aquifer, as well as the Platteville limestone. So these are our two upper. The glacial drift is about 100 feet thick, and then below that is the Platteville limestone. Once we started doing the surface sampling or the shallow water sampling, we started getting some high concentrations. Something that we looked at these concentrations, we said, this is in 2006. So we started here in 2004, 2006, our work brought us up here. And 2006, we looked at these concentrations and said, these are high enough to where there could be a vapor intrusion problem. As the contaminant off gases from the water table travels up through the soil and can enter people's homes. So we took a look at that. We did some testing of the soil gas and said, there's some pretty high levels of soil gas. And that's where we brought in EPA's emergency contractor. And many of you might remember all the events that took place during that time. Was in 2006, 2007, and 2008 is when when we finally got all the homes mitigated, which means we went through, tested underneath the concrete slab of all the homes where people would let us. We're not going to go into somebody's house that doesn't give us permission. So we tested underneath the homes, identified the extent of the contaminant release, and this hatched area here is where the study area was for the soil vapor flow. Okay, and when the testing came back, there were, I think, like 40 some houses that had, it's basically a radon mitigation system. Same thing you put in for radon. You put this in to remove the VOCs, or, TCE and PCE were the two chemicals of concern. But that removes the chemical from underneath the slab of the building and discharges that to the atmosphere so it doesn't enter the home. Again, that was, our next step was stabilize or address the human health risk, take care of that, put in the mitigation systems, got that stabilized. Now we're moving on to try and find the source area and then eventually the cleanup. And when I told you earlier, we characterize the site, what that means is we're studying the groundwater, poking holes, putting in monitoring wells, taking samples all over. We're trying to figure out how this contaminant mass is distributed in the subsurface environment. Because once we can understand that, then we can build a plan to clean it up. But the big step is, where's it coming from? Which location is it coming from? Because that's going to be the most effective way to clean it up, is to take care of the highest contaminant mass. And so our investigation has brought us right into this area here, just north of Walker Street. We've done a lot of testing out here. There's been testing in these business areas here. We even tested in the alleyway where somebody said there was a homeowner that did some industrial practices in his garage or so forth like that. And we did, testing all up and down Lake Street and all through Walker Street. And all the data has brought us to right in this area here. So we're really close to wrapping that end of it up and then moving it into the next phase. But the point that is clear when we have identified the release is we have the Reilly tar and chemical site, which is a heavy tar PAH chemical, and then we have these VOC releases, and we have contaminant area. We have a contaminated area in the deep aquifer and in the shallow aquifer that is coming from two distinct separate sources that just happen to be located a few blocks away from each other. So that's kind of where our status is. If you have additional questions, you want to know more detail about the status of our investigation and what other steps are being taken, come visit us at the table in the back there. If there's other questions. Yeah. But with that, if anybody else has any questions, wrap it up.
Thanks, Dave. So at this point, I would like to, now that you've heard from our various agencies, myself included, as city staff, if you have questions on operations and maintenance, or if you have questions on overall site management or water quality testing, or whatever your question is, if you think it pertains to the large group or others may be interested, we'll spend about 15 minutes right now answering those questions and directing them appropriately, and then we'll have an opportunity to visit, so you can go to the various stations and visit with the reps one-on-one. Yes,
I have a question about the 5-year plans, where they're assessing the site every 5 years. Is this something that contamination will be in perpetuity? Is it ever no longer contaminated?
I guess in perpetuity is a long time.
I know.
All right, so
So it's been
will there
25
be a
years.
concern for a very, very long time? Yes. Will there be continual reviews for a very long time, such as the 5-year review? Yes. Would I say that it was just forever?
Well, not forever, but what is the anticipated time for a Superfund site? Like, is it ever totally cleaned up?
Sure, Reilly, you want?
Yeah, I think you are required by law to conduct a 5-year review every 5 years. Extensive review. We do annual reviews, but 5-year reviews, we are required by Superfund law to do this till we clean up the groundwater.
And that's my question, like, is there an anticipated date when it would be cleaned up?
The groundwater?
Yes.
I would say anticipate date, no, that's not, no.
It's
You
gonna
don't
be,
have the level
not
of
in our
science.
lifetime.
Not in, okay, that's sort of where I was going.
You don't have the science, you don't need to give a date.
Okay, thank you.
So
2 or 3 years ago, when maybe it was just a year ago, when they were doing the walkway over Louisiana Avenue, they found the bubbling ooze coming out of the banks right there. Are there other places where it's been exposed, or what was that related to? Did it even related to this at all?
It's important to note that while there was a large amount of fill that was relocated, there was also a large amount of contaminated soil that was left in place and then covered with clean soil.
2 to 3
So,
feet.
correct.
Yep.
So, in that project, when we had to dig down to conduct the project, if you will, there was some of that site, some of that product that was exposed. And when, before engineering, any engineering project occurs, and Bill hinted at this in his presentation, there is, we have to submit to the NPC and the EPA, here's what we would like to do on the site. And here's how we plan, here's the testing we've done to try to determine if contaminant is present. And we did or did not, find any. And even if we didn't, had we happened to come across it, here's how we plan to handle it. So that's called a remedial action plan. So any project we do, we have to submit one of those, and the EPA and NC have to approve it. So in that case, the testing we did showed that we didn't expect to unearth anything. That's why we didn't have any kind of orange fencing up early on. But as soon as it was discovered, we put orange fencing up to keep people away from it until such time that that project cover it back up again with that clean fill to make it a safe environment for
And the 5-year review confirmed that there is no area where tar-like material is being exposed. Everything is supposed to be covered. So if there's, anybody has a backyard or anybody knows any area that's exposed and we need to cover it, please let us know. But based on our inspections and site visits and going out there, everything is covered like it needs to be.
There is a doggy park right on France Avenue, about the 3900 block. Singles Park sold at the city of Minneapolis, and Minneapolis sold it back to the Singles Park. What is that all about? Is that the reason I wanted, because I looked at the vegetation there, because it's the Meadowbrook Golf Course was enclosed to some kind that had all around it, it was green.
I would say I don't know, it doesn't sound like it's related to the Reilly site, but you're welcome to visit with our parks folks when we turn it to a small group, and maybe they can help answer that question.
That solving boom, it looked like it was similar, close to the National Lead site. Would National Lead have any impact on it?
You can see the question is, the solvent plume look close to the National Lead site? Is there a connection there at all that you
I'm sorry, the National Lead, there was something with National Lead that was.
Yeah, they were close
That
proximity.
solvent plume, it
Yeah.
looks like it's similar to that.
Yeah, and we did do testing in the National Lead site area. That was one of the areas that we talked about, but National Lead, just over by the railroad tracks, yeah, we did a number of borings and deep groundwater samples in that area there and tested that. There was, I was able to find on like an old blueprint that there was a National Lead dump, and that's the area that we targeted and tested around there. And to be honest, we didn't really find a lot of anything.
So, a couple statements. You were not familiar with her history, and you said in just this construction of the footbridge that you weren't expecting to find anything. So do you think that the records between 72 and, what is going on now are incomplete? I'm surprised that you weren't expecting to find something. So are there pools of this oily sludge? Is the stuff also percolating up as well as down so that it's pooling?
It's to our knowledge, it's not percolating up because the rain falls in and pushes down, like you mentioned earlier. Is it very inconsistent and spotty with different concentrations? Absolutely, the nature of the spillage or the leakage or whatever was occurring back in the 55 years of Reilly running. It's also very important to note, it's a great question because I forgot to mention, when we do that inspection or review, it is not just a document review. They will go out and do borings if there's any suspicion, is it even standard practice that you'll do borings on projects to ensure that?
We tested any area of soil that we were going to touch. And anything, and the levels are really, contamination levels are so tight that.
What does
it's hard
that
to get
mean,
anything-
tight?
As far as if there's traces of chemical within that soil that needs to be removed. So basically,
Okay.
that gets hauled to a landfill that is designated to take that type of material. And then clean fill is brought in.
And it's similar to 5-year review, is not just the document review. There are folks walking the ground, conducting the review on site, because it's important to have that on site, our review, and not just flip through documents that may or may not be accurate. It's a great point. Yes, sir.
Is National Lead then south of 7, where Sam's Club is?
That's
Or
correct,
not?
yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
And you didn't find anything over in that area that was
Nothing
It's
really
not
to be
linked to the
able to
POC that they talked about.
There's
That's
only
right.
auto parts and cargo glass.
And then one other thing, so you were talking about, or someone talked about that one particular well, or center that was more contaminated maybe than some others.
Well,
Or
23, yes.
why wouldn't, well, I'm not a geologist or anything, but why would they just seal it and seal the area around it?
If you seal it, you can make the case that you're locking it in place, and therefore groundwater flow could try to
Sure.
push it to other areas. But by pumping it, it's like creating a vacuum, you see negative pressure. So you're able to pull it up, A, remove some of the contaminants, and B, create flow that kind of keeps it from
Sure.
moving us. So that's why we continue to pump it to this day.
Pumping it up, it evaporates the gas, is what you're saying?
No, we pump it and run it through that GTF, that groundwater treatment facility, and have that granular activated carbon remove the PAH, so it's not going up to the air. What it does with this granular activated carbon is the PAHs adhere to the carbon. And then, once the carbon fills up of PAHs, then that's landfill and appropriate landfill, like Joe talked about, and fresh material is brought in to continue to operate and make sure that pH is optimal. Yes, sir.
Question about St. Louis Park water in comparison to other municipalities. How close is St. Louis Park's water to the best in the state? And how close is it to unacceptable?
I would put it up, now granted, I'm biased, in terms of our water quality, I'd put it up as best in the state.
The best.
And not the best, but up towards the best. Who has the best? Well, there's taste competitions, right? Go to the state fair, you're gonna have water quality taste competitions. Prior to my time in the city, or at least prior to my present role with the city, I've heard we did enter that, we took like second. So, we have very good tasting quality water. Now there's aesthetics of the water, which is what that competition is all about, aesthetics of the water. And then there's from a safety perspective or a contaminant perspective, if you will, there's that water quality. And in terms of how we rate with others, I would have to turn it over to the MDH if they'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good segue to go into bring up the Minnesota Drinking Water Report. For example, I have the one for the year 2014, but the one that we're going to be releasing is going to come out pretty soon. And basically, then it's just a document that kind of does a complete overview of the entire state of Minnesota. So it would be better able to answer your question of like how the city of St. Louis Park water rates against the other municipalities within the system. But then again, it's not a report card, and again, these issues like taste and odor, I mean, that's subjective to the actual individual themselves. But at least it gives you an overview of the types of contaminants that we are finding statewide, and basically what we're doing about it.
And so, at least as far as 2014 goes, what does the report say?
The report says, well, it mentions just that, that we're monitoring for vinyl chloride as a treatment plant number 4. The levels are consistently, below the maximum contaminant level. for that, but it's something that we've kept on what's known as quarterly monitoring, which is our method of compliance to go take 4-quarter average of the samples, and that's something that, I myself, take these samples, as a representative from the Department of Health, and we take them right to the public health lab at the, over in St. Paul. So that's basically, that comes into play.
Speaking of water treatment plant, I saw the city council at a work session on Monday about presence of volatile organic compounds approaching allowable maximum contaminant level set by the EPA. Could you comment on why it's been approaching the maximum contaminant level and what's being done about that?
Well, just a question back to you, Mark. As far as like the levels then, specifically would this be with respect to treatment plant number 4 and the levels of vinyl chloride? I wasn't at the meeting myself.
Sure. So at Monday's meeting, we did, I actually did, give a presentation to our council about the status of treatment plant 4 with respect to specifically the volatile organic chemicals that actually Dave briefed you earlier. And what's happening in a very generic description is our volatile organic chemicals, volatile organic chemical is a type of chemical, right? And then there's specific chemicals within that. So a couple of those chemicals that Dave and Craig had on their slides, those specific chemicals are starting to get on the higher end of the allowable range, right? So we're not going to wait for them to cross the threshold. We're going to work with our representative agencies to come up with a acceptable fix or treatment for it. So for instance, there are 2 steps occurring, 2 courses of action occurring simultaneously. One is working with the EPA and the NPCA and the Department of Health on an interim modification to the treatment plant where we can, in short description, inject more air. Air helps remove volatile organic chemicals. So if we inject more air into the treatment process, we'll remove more of those VOCs. And just that alone will bring down those VOC levels. Simultaneously to that, we are also working with the Department of Health and the NPCA to look at a full design for an upgrade to the plant that will include air stripping technology that Craig and Dave talked about, which is, if you will, the approved solution that, for instance, Edina has in their plant. So in other words, we're going to take that same treatment process that Edina is using, that air stripping technology. We're working with NPCA and Department of Health on a design that will allow us to install air stripping and treatment plant.
Does the consent decree reflect that there was no legal action taken against Reilly and the company that now is legally responsible?
The consent decree really governed the work going forward, as far as who's responsible for the work, and what should be done, who is overseeing, who's enforcing the work. I think this is really the purpose of the consent decree, where, if the city, God forbid, files for bankruptcy and doesn't have money to do the work, we have ourselves covered, where somebody can come in and take over the work to make sure that the remedy is implemented. I don't think it goes back, to the start of the project as far as what happened early on. I know there was some kind of settlement between the city and Reilly early on when that project was kind of transferred to the city, so to speak. But the consent decree really just to kind of make sure that the work that we are doing will continue to do, and we are protected and we have the resources to do that.
So the consent decree is not a legal document associated with trying to hold Reilly or anyone else responsible for, legally responsible for the site. The consent decree is focused on the cleanup, the maintenance, the safety of drinking water, as well as the protection overall of the environment through the containment.
But it is an enforceable document, though. It is an enforceable document.
It's legally enforceable in terms of protecting the site, but it didn't try to get into negotiating, if you will, the city versus Reilly. That was not the intent of the.
That was discussed when the city bought the site.
Oh, sure, there was definitely legal discussions between,
To protect
you know,
Reilly.
our city leadership counterparts in pretty much from 72 to 86, there was legal discussions. That is not the intent of the consent decree, that was separate.
That was separate.
But the consent decree specifically says, the city for some reason cannot meet its financial obligation for the cleanup. Reilly successors are still at the hook to come in and pay for this.
Does the EPA have a list of the 10 worst Superfund sites? Like Love Canal, and so where does Reilly, would Reilly fall on the list of the 10 or 20
I don't
worst?
think it, but it's not, I mean, it's a site where we are, doing work and protecting the community and treating the water. I mean, we have our technical challenges, but I don't think Reilly would, we have 5,000 sites in nationwide. I really don't know where would that site would rank up. It's not the worst that I've seen in our Region 5, we'll put it that way. But I would say it's somewhere in the middle.
I would throw out, from my perspective as a city employee, it is a matter of perspective. We're not present day concerned with what happened 55 years or 100 years ago now. It happened, right? People did things that either knowingly or unknowingly, or in terms of harming the environment, they did things. We're very, very proud of what we did with the site in terms of the development that's on the site, both from a commercial and residential perspective and from a park beautification perspective. We're very, very proud of what we did with the site. We hosted tours of the site just to show off, hey, like I showed that one picture, look at that really ugly eyesore of an industrial facility 100 years ago, or even just as recent as 72, compared to what it is now. When you see kids out there in a soccer tournament, it's pretty neat to see that transition. It really is. So from a matter of perspective, from our perspective, we're extremely proud of our Reilly site and what we were able to accomplish in terms of removing and improving the ugly eyesore. So at this point, it's actually after 7:30. So again, with respect to folks that aren't comfortable asking large group questions or really just want to answer or talk one-on-one with one or multiple agency reps, at this time I would like to break off from the public question and answer, kind of turn it into more of an open house format, and encourage you to visit with all of the agencies that are here. They came here this evening specific to talk to you and help educate and inform you of the current status. Thank you.